A warm welcome to you all this evening and thank you for joining us for this Wiltshire COVID-19 business update. My name is Victoria Maloney and I'm the head of South Wiltshire Economic Recovery. If you wish to see closed captions of our speakers' words, then please click on the CC button on the bottom right of the screen and they should then appear after about 30 seconds. The system sometimes takes a little while to warm up. If you have any technical issues, then these are usually solved by closing down the meeting link and then rejoining. You are welcome to submit a question to be answered using the chat function. We will try and provide written replies in the chat, and our presenters will also answer verbally as many as they're able to get to. We know that the business grants can be confusing, so first tonight, Sam Fox, Corporate Director for Placed Environment, will talk you through the grants that may be available to your business and how you can apply. Then our Director of Public Health, Kate Blackburn, will provide you the latest local COVID statistics, some of the context behind them, and an update on the community testing programme. We'll then answer as many of your questions that we can. Some have been sent in already, and thanks to those of you that have done so, and we'll respond to others asked tonight as well. Please note, though, that we cannot respond to questions specifically about your business or your application. If you have questions of this nature, please contact our grants team directly and we'll put the email address on the screen at the end of the presentation. I'll now hand you over to Sam Fox.
Thank you, Victoria, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by talking about the grants and showing where we are in Wiltshire. By Christmas, we'd paid over £100 million in COVID grant payments to over 10,000 Wiltshire businesses. More recently, since the start of the third lockdown, we've paid out £23 million to over 3,000 businesses, and around 2,300 of those have been the local restrictions support grant, and more than 800 the additional restrictions grant. I'll come on and explain those in a bit. This has been a significant undertaking by our team of over 50 staff who've been working around the clock, with many of them brought in from other areas of the council to help with the COVID response and to support local businesses. I'd like just to cast our minds back to the week before Easter last year, when the Chancellor announced the new funding regime and brought us a new word that we previously weren't aware of, even when playing Scrabble, and that was furlough. We've ended up with complex procedures having to underpin our grants work, so it wasn't just a case of us putting the money out straight away. We've had to make sure that we undertake the right fraud checks, that we've got the right state aid rules in place and they're being followed, that we've got an auditable grant application process which we had to design from scratch. And as part of that, we also wanted to make sure that that you as businesses across Wiltshire were given the right information and advice. And we set up a 7-day-a-week contact centre to support that. So back to today. The additional restrictions grant is currently open for applications, and I'll have more information on this grant later in the presentation. The government have also extended the deadline for the Christmas support payment for wet pubs until the 28th of February. It was originally the 31st of January. Wet pubs are defined as those with less than 50% of sales on food. We think we've contacted nearly all the pubs that are eligible for this grant in Wiltshire, but if your business derives less than 50% of sales from food and was one established before 1st of December 2020, then you could be eligible for this one-off payment of £1,000. So please do get in touch with the team via the email that we'll put on the screen at the end of the webinar. Finally, for this slide, we know how important this funding is for your business, and we're still awaiting government payments for some schemes, including the local restriction support grant for the period 16th to 30th of December. So if you have applied and meet the criteria, please be patient, because as soon as we have this funding, we'll process the payments. I think it's also worth just mentioning now that the Chancellor announced on the 2nd of December that that grant period that was going to cover the period from the 16th of December. Now, we normally get a little bit of lag from when the Chancellor makes an announcement to when we get the detailed guidance from BEIS, the government department. But also we sometimes get a lag from when we actually receive the money as a council and get the formal notification from government. Now, the fact that was announced on the 2nd of December by the Chancellor, and I'm now talking to you on the 3rd of February and we still haven't had the money, is of real concern to us, and it's something that we've raised with the government department BEIS in our meetings with them and with the local MPs, and it's now been taken up with Treasury. So hopefully we'll have an answer on this very quickly. Now we'll move on to explain some of the grants that you can apply for if you haven't done so already. And I apologise for the fact that this is quite confusing. The first type of grant to discuss is the Local Restriction Support Grant, or LRSG. This is available for businesses that pay rates or have a rate account and whose premises had to close as a result of national restrictions or local tier periods. There are lots of different versions of the LRSG depending on which time period it covers. For example, there's one grant that covers the current time period while we're in national lockdown, another from when we were in Tier 2 from the 2nd to the 30th of December, and another for the time we were in Tier 3 from the 31st of December to the 5th of January. Each of these different versions of the grant will pay out different amounts based on the rateable value of your business. If you're unsure which grant is which, or you need to know how much your grant may be, we have a handy PDF guide on the business grants page of our website that explains all the individual grants, and we'll post a link to this at the end of the presentation. But while there are lots of different versions of the same grant, the good news is that if you've applied for one, we've made sure that you will automatically receive funding for all the grants you're entitled to under the LRSG scheme. So you only need to apply once, but you do need to apply, and these schemes are separate, so the ones that ran between April and August last year don't apply in this case. So if you haven't applied since before November 2020, you will need to apply again. Examples of the businesses that can apply for the LRSG are non-essential retail, pubs, cafes, restaurants and visitor attractions. But this isn't an exhaustive list, so if your business pays rates or has a rate account and you had to close because of COVID restrictions, please apply if you haven't already. If you have applied and you're waiting payment, please be assured that the team are processing applications as quickly as they can. At the moment, we're dealing with about 100 new applications a day. You can contact the team if you have any questions about your application, and again, we'll put the contact details on the screen at the end of the presentation. Please note that if you already have applied for a local restriction support grant once, you don't need to apply again. And if you're eligible for other versions of the grant, we will pay those automatically. So hopefully that's covered the local restrictions grant. We'll now move on to the additional restrictions grant, which is also known as discretionary payments, or ARG. These grants are for businesses that do not pay rates or that have not been closed by restrictions or that have not received any other COVID grants. So if you feel that your business needs funding due to COVID and you've been impacted by it and you're not eligible for any other grants, then you should apply for a grant under the ARG scheme. As I've said previously, we opened this grant back up for new applications only last week. So if you've not applied for this grant before, or if you've previously applied before November 2020, you can apply now. If you have applied previously, you don't need to reapply, as if you're eligible, you'll receive a further payment automatically, and those payments should be going through for about 800 businesses in the coming days. We're expecting to keep applications open until the 12th of February, unless it becomes oversubscribed, and of course we may extend the window if the fund is undersubscribed. So with this in mind, I'd urge you to get your applications in as quickly as you can if you think you may be eligible. Grant payments range from £1,500 to £10,000, depending on the number of employees your business has. So it's funding that can really make a difference to your business. It's also important to note that the eligibility criteria for the ARG will be determined by the assessment of your application. So if you are unsure about whether your business is eligible, please make sure you apply and we will assess your application and make a decision. So hopefully that's a rundown of the grants. I'll now hand you over to Kate for the public health update. Kate.
Thank you, Sam, and good evening, everyone. So before I give you an update on our upcoming community testing programme, which I know many of you are interested in and what it may mean for businesses, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the current situation in Wiltshire. And just to reiterate, these stats are for the Wiltshire Council Local Authority area. They do not include Swindon. So I think if we move on just to the next slide, it does continue to be an encouraging picture. Locally, COVID cases are still falling. And we've now had 20 consecutive days of case numbers declining, and I'd really like to thank all our residents and our businesses for their continued support in helping us to achieve this. So I'll talk through this week's figures in a little more detail to give you some context around the population. So as of 4 p.m. today, in the last 7 days of reported data, there's been 912 new cases of COVID reported in Wiltshire. The current rate of cases per 100,000 population for Wiltshire in the last 7 days is now at 161.6. Now that's below the national rate of 269.1 at the moment. And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen those local authority areas which border our county also see a decline in their 7-day rate to a similar position to Wiltshire. Now, whilst cases continue to be spread relatively evenly across Wiltshire by geography, they are not spread evenly across the age groups in our population. So we currently see lowest rates of transmission in our children and young people aged 0 to 14, and we have seen and still continue to see our highest rates of cases in the 20 to 29 year age group. Now, that's been a consistent pattern and is related mainly to the employment within this age group, often requiring those to still attend a workplace in person, and that inevitably will increase the potential for viral transmission. However, even in this age group, the rate has now dropped from a high that we saw in mid-January, where the case rate was at 867 per 100,000 population, and that's now down to 256.5 per 100,000 population. So again, it continues to be positive. Now, throughout December and January, we did also see rates increasing in our population aged 60 and over. And now, of course, this is the age group who are at higher risk of more severe illness from the virus. And so we're pleased to have seen the rate here also drop to a current 7-day rate of about 128 from a peak that we saw in mid-January. And of course, that peak in cases was putting significant pressure on our health and social care systems. Now, in Wiltshire, there have been 528 registered deaths, which included COVID-19 on the death certificate. That was up to the 15th of January. And that sadly was an increase of 32 deaths on the previous week's figures that we'd seen. So Wiltshire's mortality rate is 105.6 per 100,000 population, and that is lower than the England rate, which is 156.6. And as always, our thoughts and condolences go out to anyone and everyone who has suffered a loss due to COVID. I just want to go back to our overall cases now. So if I could pop onto the next slide, please. It's really important to say that even though case numbers are on the decline, as you can see in this graph, we still have very high rates of infection. If we think back to September, October time, if a local authority's 7-day case rate was at 20 per 100,000, that immediately necessitated action nationally so that we could bring that rate down. So you can see with a case rate still over 150, it's still very high, and so infections could take off very quickly. So everybody still needs to continue to stick to the rules and minimise leaving the house and having any contact with people as much as is possible. So really just to emphasise, to ensure your businesses and your employees are really continuing to follow social distancing guidelines at all times. A number of the outbreaks that we've been involved in supporting, the social distancing within the business area has been absolutely superb. And then it's been on breaks outside where people just by human nature have forgotten how important it is to stay 2 meters apart. So really important just to make sure employees are continuing to following social distancing. People washing their hands more often than usual and wearing a face covering where it's appropriate to do so. We really don't want to see any of the progress we've made be undone now through any complacency. 1 in 3 people that have COVID-19 don't display any symptoms. So we're asking people to act as if you have the virus and do everything you can to stop it from spreading. Now, I'm sure some of you will be aware that we've worked with a number of businesses around guidance to be COVID secure through the public health and public protection teams, and have also supported a number of settings through outbreaks and positive cases associated with their businesses to help in containing that viral spread. And we've also written out recently again to a number of businesses with guidance and support, and we've got signs and floor markings available which we're very happy to share with you to ensure that everyone is abiding by the guidance still. And if you'd like more information on this, you can contact our wonderful communications team. We'll make sure that the email is circulated and available to you all. So we do know how difficult this all continues to be, and the vast majority of Wiltshire employers are following the guidance, and that's really shown in the falling case numbers that's happened. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing. and all of you are continuing to do to keep each other and your employees safe. So I did just want to touch on community testing before I finish. Now, some of you may know this as asymptomatic testing or lateral flow testing or rapid testing, but it's essentially the testing that's done using a swab that gives you a result within 20 to 30 minutes. The accuracy is not as good as the PCR testing, which is the one that is more commonly used, and so we have to apply these tests where they make the most sense in protecting the vulnerable. So currently in Wiltshire, as with all of our local authority colleagues in the southwest, we're in the planning stages of introducing the government's asymptomatic rapid community testing. We'll be doing that locally, and that's really aimed at targeted populations who are unable to work from home. Now, I am treating rapid testing very cautiously. This is not a test to release, and a negative test does not mean that you don't have the virus. This is a programme of testing to identify so that actually people who do have the virus can be removed from settings. And so if it's used alongside other methods of infection prevention and control, it can be a useful tool and help reduce the spread of the virus. However, I would like to reiterate that a negative test is not a passport to freedom, and people still need to take all the measures and precautions very seriously, which we've mentioned before, such as social distancing, washing hands and wearing face coverings. Now, one of the groups this is specifically being aimed at is people who work within small businesses. Those in larger businesses are being supported by other testing programs, and these are being set up nationally. Now, originally, this was for companies with more than 250 employees that the national program would support, but actually that's been expanded literally in the last few days to include companies with more than 50 employees. And it's because of this changing national picture that we're having to factor that into our local planning so that we're really maximising this alongside all of the other virus outbreak control measures that we're running. So given the timescales, it is a challenging logistical task, but we're working really hard, and we've identified 4 locations where we anticipate our temporary sites will be. I had hoped to share that with you this evening. However, we are awaiting government to sign off our plans, so unfortunately we're not quite in a position to confirm where they will be as yet, as things could still change. But please sign up to our business newsletter for the latest updates, and please also be assured that we will keep you as updated as possible throughout all of this. One of the other tools just to mention at our disposal in terms of containing the virus is test and trace. And I'm really pleased to say that across Wiltshire, 96% of COVID cases are being successfully contact traced, either by the national NHS test and trace service or our local tracing partnership that my public health team run. So our team reach out to people by calling, emailing, and will soon be conducting doorstep visits to people to ensure that every case has the opportunity to complete their contact tracing with one of our trained and, may I say, also very friendly staff. For our local service, our team has been managing to reach around half of the cases we try to follow up, and that stayed consistent even when overall cases increased considerably. And when we think that these are cases who generally don't have the correct contact details, who haven't responded to the national scheme, it's really helped to boost the number of people that we're contacting. Now, feedback on the local scheme does continue to be positive, and our core handlers are able to signpost individuals to a number of sources of support to enable them to self-isolate. So if we could ask you to highlight and save 0300 456 0100 into your phones, so that if you do need to be contacted by our friendly team for any reason, you know who it is that's trying to reach you. So I'll finish there. Thank you ever so much, and I'll hand back over to Victoria for the Q&A part of the evening.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you to all of you who submitted questions beforehand. We're going to answer some of these now, along with the questions you've submitted this evening. And please remember, if you do have any further questions, type them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. The first question we received beforehand is actually from several people, which is that I have a business rates account, but I don't pay rates. Which grant do I apply for? And I'm going to answer that one. For the local restriction support grant, you just need to have a current business rate account. We are aware that small businesses may not actually pay rates, but as long as you have a rate account, you are entitled to a grant if you meet the other eligibility criteria. You do not need to have a rate account for the additional restrictions grant. The next question comes from Claire Fall, who says, I run a holiday let and we have had to cancel a lot of bookings. We're not registered as a business and we don't pay business rates on the property. Can I apply for a discretionary grant? And I'm going to ask Sam to answer that one.
Yes, thank you for your question, Claire. We're aware that not all businesses will pay business rates, particularly holiday lets who may pay council's tax instead. So you do not need to pay business rates to apply for the additional restrictions grant. As before though, if you have a business rates account but aren't required to pay business rates, you may be eligible for the local restriction support grant. And regarding business registration, this is something that our assessment team will look at. And in the grant, you need to have been actively trading prior to the lockdowns being introduced. So we'd welcome your application if you feel you should make one, Claire.
Thanks, Sam. The next question comes from Clive Chamberlain. Clive says, I've been unable to claim any benefits since the start of the pandemic. I pay myself as the proprietor of the business on an ad hoc basis and not through PAYE. We are a fully registered PLC. Can I apply for a grant? So thanks for your question, Clive. If your business has a property that is eligible for the local restriction support grant, you can receive a grant regardless of your payment mechanism. So your constitution of your business doesn't affect your eligibility for that grant. Under the additional restrictions grant, we are happy to accept applications from people who are paid by dividends or by other means. We do ask for a copy of your latest tax return so that we can evidence you've been trading. If you are unable to provide a tax return because you're a startup business, our team will be in touch to consider your individual circumstances. The next question is from Nicola Holman, and I think we've already answered this question, but just to go through it again, Nicola asks, please could you explain the difference between the LRSG and the ARG? Do I need to apply for the £6,000 grant for businesses from 5th of January 21 separately, or will it be paid automatically? And I'm going to ask Sam to answer that one.
Nicola, I've already answered a presentation. Just to reiterate, the local restrictions grant is for businesses that have a business account who are required businesses look at the gov.uk closure list before applying. Post that link at the end of this presentation. £6,000 grant is, so can anyone still hear me? I've just had a message that I've got.
I think you've cut out there, Sam, so I'll just quickly reiterate. So this is, what's the difference between the LRSG and ARG, and do we need to apply separately for the £6,000 one-off grant from the 5th of January? So to reiterate, the local restrictions grant is for businesses that have a rate account required to close under COVID-19 regulation, such as shops, restaurants, hairdressers and pubs. We do recommend that businesses look at the gov.uk closure list before applying, and that we'll post that link at the end of the presentation. The additional restrictions grant is available for businesses not covered by the local restrictions grant that operate in Wiltshire. The £6,000 grant, which actually varies in amount and is a one-off payment announced by the Chancellor on the 5th of January, is only available for businesses who are eligible for LRSG. If you have already applied and been successful, this will be paid automatically. The next question comes from Lily Jade Gunning, who says, if we have already applied for the additional restrictions grant in November, when will we know about future payments? We are paying a further award of ARG funding to businesses who were successful in the November-December application window, so they do not need to apply again. This funding is currently in the process of being paid, and we expect to notify you early next week about a further award. The next question we have received is anonymous. It says, I applied for a small business grant in June last year. Do I need to apply for one of these grants? And I think we've had a similar question in the FAQ to say whether if you've applied for a discretionary grant in midsummer, if you need to apply for the ARG. So you will need to complete an application form. The LRSG and the ARG have different criteria and conditions compared to the small business grants, the retail, hospitality and leisure grants, and the discretionary grants last year. The window for these grants opened in November. So if you've not applied since the opening date in November, you will need to submit a new application. Please only apply once for either the LRSG or ARG, and as we've detailed, all further funding awards will be made against your initial claim. The next question is from Chris Patrick, who says, please can you explain the grants that may be available to village halls and similar organisations? So Village halls are eligible for the local restriction support grant as long as the applicant is the ratepayer and as long as the main service of that village hall has had to close due to restrictions. In general terms, we do expect that village halls will be closed and therefore be eligible. There are some types of uses that are allowed to continue, but I would encourage you to apply so your case can be considered. Katerina Johnston asks, I didn't realise that the first ARG grant in November was available for businesses that weren't forced to close. For example, businesses that have continued to trade online, so not officially closed as businesses. I've applied for the grant this time round. Would I be able to apply for the first ARG grant, as some grants have been opened or backdated? Thanks for your question, Katerina. At this time, we are not backdating the ARG applications to the November lockdown. The additional restrictions grant is a finite fund, and we're keen to help as many businesses as possible. So after this application window and after every application window, and as we get more data about the levels of demand and the numbers of businesses in need of support, we may make further awards going forward. We've got another question, which, if a business started after the first lockdown, March 2020, is it eligible for grants in the second and third lockdown? So to be eligible for the local restriction support grant or the ARG grant, you needed to have been trading the day before restrictions came into force. Grants are available, but they are dependent on the day you started trading. So for the November lockdown, if you are eligible if you are trading on the 5th of November, you are eligible for that payment. And going forward into future tiers, if you are trading on the day before restrictions came into force, you are eligible for that grant payment. We've got another question from Paul. With regards to the ARG grants, are there payments for the period between the end of second lockdown while we were in tier 2 and 3 as our business could not operate? If so, what might they be? So as we went over with Katerina, the ARG payment is not related to the tier restrictions period. As Sam mentioned earlier, it's got a much longer running span. It runs to the end of March 22. And so the ARG windows are as they open and close. And as we get more evidence about that level of demand and the level of awards that we're able to make, we may make further awards in future. And then another question is this webinar recorded, and how will we find the link for those that missed the webinar to catch up? And it will be on YouTube, and it will also be in our business newsletter. Thank you for all your questions. I think that's all we've got time for this evening, but before we go, I just want to highlight some of the places that you can find out more information about the grants. The first is the business grants page on our website, which has all the grants information, the 2 online forms through which you can apply, and a sign up link to our weekly e-newsletter. I really recommend that you sign up to our e-newsletter for the latest updates. It's how we will let you know about any application windows, any further funding windows, and any information from government. You can also find out if your business is eligible for a grant on the government website. Don't worry if that website address is too long. There is a link to it on our grants page. So if you go onto our grants page, you can go through a little questionnaire that says whether or not you might be eligible. And finally, you can contact us via this email address, which is COVID-19 businesssupport@wiltshire.gov.uk. Please do check online first to see if your question can be answered there, because we are dealing with a very high volume of emails. That brings our webinar to a close. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you found it useful. Have a lovely evening.